If you enjoy heartfelt, true-to-life stories, we'd love for you to subscribe and tap the bell. Thanks for being here. Let's get into today's story. I used to think something was wrong with me. I wasn't loud enough, pretty enough, interesting enough. I thought if I laughed at the right moments, if I worked harder, if I stayed out of trouble, maybe then he'd look at me the way he looked at my brothers. With pride. With warmth. With even the smallest flicker of admiration. But he never did. My name is Alina, and I spent the first 20 years of my life trying to earn a smile from my father that didn't come with terms and expiration dates. My dad, Richard, wasn't abusive. He wasn't cruel, not in the obvious ways. He didn't yell, didn't hit. He didn't have to. His silence was worse. It was heavy. Cold. When Jake got a passing grade after flunking for months, Dad clapped him on the back like he just won a national award. When I brought home straight A's, he said, "Good," and turned back to the evening news. I remember one time, I spent 3 hours making a handmade card for Father's Day, complete with glitter, a poem, and a sketch of him fishing, his favorite thing. I gave it to him after dinner, heart pounding in my chest like I was handing him a piece of my soul. He barely glanced at it. Said, "Thanks," without looking up. 5 minutes later, my brother Ryan gave him a mug that said, #1dad, and he held it up like a trophy. I stood there with my card in my hand, the poem still sticking out, and something in me just folded. That was the first time I realized my love had to be earned. My presence had to be proven. And I wasn't enough. Jake was the smooth one. Ryan was the athlete. They were loud, magnetic, easy to praise. I was the quiet one. The moody girl with ink on her fingers from writing stories and notebooks nobody read. The one who always got the last turn, the smallest piece, the leftovers. When Mom was around, she tried to soften things. Little hugs, whispered reassurances. "You're special too, sweetheart," she'd say, rubbing my back in the kitchen while Dad and my brothers laughed over a game. But even she couldn't deny the hierarchy. When Jake needed money, Dad handed over bills without asking. When Ryan needed a ride at 3 a.m., Dad threw on a coat. I once asked for a new sketchbook. He looked at me and said, "What for? You'll just give up halfway like always." That line, those words, dug into me deeper than I think he ever realized. So I stopped asking. I stopped speaking up. At the dinner table, I learned to listen, not interrupt. If I had something to share, I rehearsed it in my head first, made sure it wasn't too much or too emotional. Sometimes I got halfway through and just stopped. Nobody noticed. The conversation would shift to football, or Jake's new venture, or Ryan's girlfriend. But even then, something inside me was changing. Not sadness. Not completely. Something sharper. Anger, maybe? Or clarity. A need not just to be seen, but to be impossible to ignore. I started working harder. Not to impress them, but to build something for myself. I studied late, applied to every scholarship I could find. I took jobs others didn't want. I buried myself in ambition, not because I thought he'd be proud, but because I knew one day I'd need my own wings. And when that day came, I wouldn't ask anyone to look. I'd be too far above them for it to matter. Still, I can't lie. Some nights, I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, just wanting one thing. For him to say, "I'm proud of you, Alina." Not as a throwaway line. Not as an afterthought. But because he meant it. I waited for that moment. It never came. I was invisible in my own family. That's not drama. That's reality. It's the slow bleed of being overlooked for so long that even your shadow starts to fade. I could have won a national award and still only been mentioned between sips of beer. "Yeah, Alina's doing something with, what is it, computers?" And that would be it. So I stopped waiting for the applause. I stopped trying to fit their mold. I built my own version of success, brick by quiet brick. I didn't talk about it. I didn't post about it. I just worked. And as I grew, something surprising happened. The desperation started to die. The ache began to fade. Their validation used to be oxygen. Now it felt more like smoke. By the time I launched my own company, they still thought I was working some office job. Downtown somewhere. Nobody asked? Nobody knew. But that was okay. That was the point. And yet, there was still that tiny, poisonous part of me that wanted to show them. Not to rub it in, but to finally take up space at the table. To say, I exist. I did this. Look at me now. That moment would come. And when it did, it wouldn't be with a speech or a scream. It would be with silence. A well-placed envelope. A name they didn't recognize. A company they never knew I'd built. And a smile, my smile, without conditions. After that last family dinner, something inside me snapped, but not in the way most people imagine. It wasn't a loud explosion or an emotional breakdown. It was quieter than that. More deliberate. Like a door in my mind slowly closed, and for the first time, I locked it from the inside. I stopped trying to win my father's attention, stopped hoping for a moment of recognition that would never come. I didn't lash out or write long messages trying to explain how I felt. I simply vanished from their lives. Not physically at first, but emotionally. I became a ghost in plain sight. I started skipping family dinners. When they texted in the group chat, I read and said nothing. No drama, no accusations, no guilt trips, just silence. And the silence grew comfortable. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment far enough from home that nobody could just drop by. It was modest, cheap carpet, cracked tiles in the kitchen, but it was mine. My space. No voices measuring my worth against touchdowns or startup pitches. Just me, my laptop, and the world I was about to build. My startup wasn't flashy at first. It was born from frustration, mine and others. A digital platform that streamlined chaotic, outdated service systems for small businesses. Nothing glamorous. Nothing people would boast about at cocktail parties. But it solved the real problem. And that was enough for me. I spent sleepless nights teaching myself things I should have learned in business school but never had time or money for. I read forums, watched tutorials, crashed through free online courses with notebooks filled cover to cover. I didn't have a mentor, a network, or seed money. Just drive, and a quiet, buried rage that fueled me more than any coffee ever could. The early days were brutal. Some nights dinner was a pack of saltines and a boiled egg. My electricity was shut off once because I forgot the due date and couldn't pay the late fee. But I didn't quit. I freelanced during the day, editing boring documents, transcribing interviews, whatever paid. At night I coded, designed, rebuilt. Every rejection email I received felt like a paper cut. But I kept going. I didn't post about it. I didn't send updates to the family chat. My brothers were still sharing snapshots of client wins and flexing vacation pics. I let them believe I was struggling, still stuck in that little side project they once waved off with a smirk. I wasn't interested in proving anything, at least not yet. Then, something shifted. A client I'd onboard manually, the kind of small business owner who answered emails at 2 a.m., sent me a message. This platform fixed problems we've had for 10 years. You actually listened. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Longer than I'd care to admit. It wasn't praise from a father figure. It wasn't love from someone I was desperate to please. But it was real. And it was enough. Word began to spread in small circles. I started getting inquiries. My inbox, once empty, now buzzed with interest. A niche investor saw promise in what I was doing. We had a call. Then a second. Then came the term sheet. It wasn't millions. But it was enough to quit my side jobs, hire 2 contractors, and move the platform from beta to a full launch. I signed the paperwork with shaking hands. Not from fear, but from disbelief. This wasn't luck. This was the result of every sleepless night, every time I sat in a dark room while my family celebrated someone else. This was mine. My apartment remained modest, but my mind expanded. I walked straighter. Spoke clearer. I started using my voice in meetings. I stopped apologizing before offering my opinion. I built a team of people who, like me, had been underestimated. People with no fancy degrees or glowing resumes, just grit and sharp minds no one had nurtured, until now. I was still invisible to my family. And strangely, I preferred it that way. They didn't know about the co-working space I upgraded to, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and polished floors. They didn't know about the small awards I began to win, or the articles where my name appeared as founder and CEO. I kept it quiet. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing silence. Because this time, it was on my terms. I watched from a distance as my father continued to brag about Ryan's new position, Jake's next big venture. I'd scroll past their social media posts like they were ads for a movie I'd already seen, overhyped, predictable, and not worth the ticket. At holiday dinners I no longer attended, they raised toasts and clinked glasses without me. They probably didn't even notice my absence. Or maybe they did, and it was just easier not to mention it. But while they laughed in living rooms I no longer stepped into, I was building something they couldn't see, and one day wouldn't be able to ignore. The money came slower than the growth. I wasn't rich. Not yet. But I was free. Free to say no. Free to walk away. Free to look in the mirror and not flinch at the reflection. That freedom was worth more than any trophy my brothers had ever won. One night, almost a year after launch, I walked past a mirror in the co-working space's hallway. I stopped. I didn't look like the girl they used to ignore. I looked like a woman who had survived invisibility and turned it into armor. A woman who no longer begged to be seen, because she had built something no one could look away from for much longer. I whispered to my reflection, "Let them keep talking. Let them keep laughing. They'll see me soon enough." And they would. Not through my words, but through what I was about to do next. 2 years. That's how long I stayed away. 2 years of silence, no calls, no visits, not even a passing comment in the family group chat. I had become a ghost, and to be honest, I think they preferred it that way. It made things simpler. No awkward questions about where I was or what I was doing. They could continue their lives pretending I was some soft failure tucked away in a quiet apartment, probably still sketching or chasing a pipe dream. But in reality, I had become something they never imagined. A force. In those 2 years, the company I built grew from a niche platform into a serious player. We secured major clients. We went from a quiet, under-the-radar solution to an industry disruptor. Our name started appearing in B2B publications. I hired a legal team, a financial strategist, a CTO. Every decision was calculated. Every move, silent but sharp. I didn't flaunt anything. Not yet. Because I wasn't building this to prove a point. I was building it for a moment. A very specific one. And I knew it would come. Father's Day was approaching. For most, it's just another Hallmark holiday. For me, it had always been a reminder. A reminder of the card I made that got ignored. Of the mug that got a standing ovation. Of the decades I spent twisting myself into knots trying to earn his smile. But this year, I wasn't waiting for recognition. I was giving a gift. One that couldn't be returned. I sent one message to the family chat, 6 words long. "I'll be there this Father's Day." No follow-up. No explanation. Just the message. The read receipts came in quickly, one after another, followed by a line of emojis, surprised faces, thumbs up, and the inevitable "Wow!" from Ryan. But nobody reached out privately. That was fine. I didn't need them to. I arrived early. Earlier than anyone expected. The sun hadn't even fully set when I pulled up in front of the house I once called home. A sleek, black luxury car carried me there, quiet and commanding. I stepped out, heels clicking against the stone driveway, each sound a small declaration. I am not the same girl you ignored. The house looked the same, neatly trimmed hedges, tastefully bland furniture, a perfect American facade. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here to end something. Inside, the smell of barbecue drifted through the air. Laughter echoed from the backyard. I could hear my brothers already making the evening about themselves. Jake with his endless stories about venture capital, Ryan probably flashing his latest promotion like a badge of honor, and Dad, at the center of it all, soaking it in. I didn't walk in right away. I waited, watching through the window as they raised glasses, hugged family friends, and posed for selfies. Then, when the moment felt right, I stepped through the front door. The room shifted the second I entered. All at once, heads turned. Conversations paused. Glasses lowered. And for the first time in years I saw them, really saw them, see me. Jake's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Ryan blinked like I was a hallucination. Dad turned his head slowly, drink in hand, smile already forming, until he registered my face. My presence. Well, he said, his voice slick with condescension. Look who decided to remember she has a family. A few polite laughs followed. Nothing malicious, just awkward. Everyone assumed this was some kind of olive branch. A quiet daughter finally crawling back for a seat at the table. I smiled. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Dinner began the way they always did, loud, chaotic, performative. Jake bragged about landing an investor in Dubai. Ryan mentioned buying a second property. Dad beamed through it all, eyes shining, teeth flashing, pride dripping from every word. When there was a lull, I spoke. I've been working on something too, I said, tone neutral. A project. Dad didn't even glance at me. He waved his hand in that dismissive way I knew too well. Yes, I'm sure you're keeping busy. Good for you. The words stung, but only for a second. I had expected them. I welcomed them, actually, because they were the last he would ever speak from that place of smug superiority. I stood slowly, pulling a slim, black envelope from my bag. All eyes followed it. I brought you a gift, I said, walking the length of the table, stopping just in front of him. A little something for Father's Day. He chuckled, reaching for it without hesitation. Should I expect glitter this time? More laughter. He opened it casually. Unfolded the legal document inside. His eyes began to scan. At first, his expression remained unchanged, just polite confusion. Then, slowly, his brow furrowed. His fingers tightened on the paper. His lips parted, eyes darting from line to line. The silence that followed was absolute. What is this? He asked, voice cracking. Jake leaned over. Ryan stood to peek. My mother, who had been quietly setting plates, stopped mid-step. I stayed calm. That's the official acquisition agreement. My company, well, technically, my holding company, just finalized a silent takeover of Anderson Tech. Dad looked up, pale. That's my company. Was, I corrected. Effective last week, it's mine. Every asset. Every board vote. Every decision. All under my name. He blinked, shaking his head as if he could rattle the truth out of it. That's not possible. Jake snatched the paper. This is a joke, right? You're not even in tech. You were drawing pictures and posting poetry or whatever. Ryan muttered. This doesn't make sense. How could she afford? I let them talk. I didn't need to defend. The document spoke for me. My father finally spoke again. You did this behind my back? I didn't need your permission, I said. You were never looking anyway. The silence was now suffocating. The kind that clings to your skin. My father was visibly trembling. The paper in his hands looked like it was burning him. But why? He whispered. I looked him dead in the eye. Because you never saw me. And now you can't look away. He swallowed hard, face strained of all color. I don't understand. I don't understand how you never tried to, I said. That was always the problem. Jake stood up abruptly. You think this proves something? That you're better than us? This is petty. No, I said, my voice level. This is business. Cold, clean, legal. You all taught me that. Every time you ignored me. Every time you laughed. Ryan threw down his fork. You really think you're the boss now? I stepped closer to the window, pointed at the sleek car parked just outside. No, Ryan. I don't think. I know. My father tried to speak again, but the words failed. His hand pressed against the table like he needed it to stay upright. My brother sat stunned. My mother stayed frozen in the corner, silent as always. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say another word. I turned, walked calmly out the door, and slid back into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I could hear shouting inside, chaotic, panicked, desperate. And then, through the open front door, I heard it. My father's voice. Not yelling. Screaming. But not in rage. In fear. I drove away, not looking back. Not this time. I didn't go home that night. Not that house, anyway. The one with the glass windows and the cold stone porch where I'd once stood with a handmade card clutched in my tiny fingers. No, I drove to the apartment that overlooked the skyline, the one I had upgraded to a few months earlier, the one with no memories soaked into its walls. Just space. Quiet. Control. I locked the door behind me and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 20 years. The buzz of what I had done was still settling. The acquisition wasn't just symbolic. It was complete. Legal. Binding. My name wasn't just on the papers. It was etched into every server, every employee handbook, every leadership document. The moment my father opened that envelope, the balance of power shifted. And not just in a corporate sense. That man, Richard, who had sat at the head of every table in our family's life, who had handed out praise like a currency reserve for his sons, who had laughed when I dared to speak about my dreams, was no longer untouchable. He wasn't the patriarch anymore. He was an employee. And I was his superior. The irony wasn't lost on me. For weeks after Father's Day, the fallout rippled quietly. My phone buzzed with missed calls from numbers I hadn't saved. There were emails from Jake, carefully worded, vague, and polite. Maybe we should all talk. There were none from Ryan, of course. He had always been more blunt. If he was seething, he was doing it silently. As for my father, he sent nothing. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a forwarded news article. But that didn't surprise me. It was always silence with him, except now, the silence was no longer power. It was fear. I knew from my legal team that he'd tried to negotiate. There was a board meeting scheduled, a standard one, but I was invited to attend as a guest of honor. The agenda? Smooth transition. I was encouraged to speak a few words to the staff, the shareholders, and yes, the former executive team, including my father. So I went. I walked into the Anderson Tech headquarters wearing a tailored navy blue suit and heels that didn't flinch on marble floors. My father was already inside. I saw him before he saw me. He looked smaller than I remembered. Same gray suit. Same stiff shoulders. But something was missing. Maybe the confidence. Maybe the arrogance. When he turned and saw me, his face didn't shift. No smile. No frown. Just stillness. Like a man who had rehearsed this moment over and over but still couldn't quite believe it had arrived. Alina, he said. My name for once, without the usual shrug. Mr. Richardson, I replied, using the same cold professionalism he had once weaponized against me. He blinked at the surname. I changed mine legally 2 years ago, partly for privacy, partly for distance. I was no longer his in name, nor in legacy. I was mine. In the boardroom, I stood at the head of the table, the seat he had once occupied with the ease of assumed entitlement. Everyone watched as I began to speak. I won't take much of your time, I said, voice clear. I just want to thank those of you who built this company from the ground up. You didn't just serve a CEO. You created value, culture, and continuity. This next chapter isn't about erasing that. It's about expanding it. Evolving. Making sure that the overlooked brilliance in this room gets the same spotlight it always deserved. There was a pause. Not applause, not at first. Just silence. Listening. Then, a few claps. Then more. I smiled and nodded, then sat, right where my father used to sit. Afterward, he asked for a private word. We stood in the hallway, away from the glass walls, out of view of the boardroom. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prepare what I'd say. I wasn't defending. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just present. I underestimated you, he said, voice low. I nodded. You did. I thought you were, well, softer than this. I was, I replied. Until I realized softness didn't mean weakness. You just taught me to sharpen it. He hesitated. I could tell he was struggling, trying to find the version of me he could still patronize, still diminish. But I wasn't there anymore. He was speaking to a woman he didn't know how to hurt. I didn't mean to, he began. Yes, you did, I interrupted. You meant every silence. Every shrug. Every time you celebrated my brothers like they were gods and dismissed me like I was a footnote. You meant it all. You just didn't think I'd remember. He looked away. That was his tell. Always had been. I never thought you were a loser, Alina. I exhaled through my nose, just barely keeping the bitter smile from my face. You said it once. You called me the loser at the table. Loud enough for Jake and Ryan to laugh until they cried. He flinched. Good. But it's okay, I said. Because I'm not. He looked at me then, really looked. And I saw it, that flicker of realization. That I wasn't just successful. I was in control. He wasn't speaking to the background character anymore. He was speaking to the author of the story. And she had rewritten the ending. That night, I got an email from HR. My father had submitted a voluntary resignation. No dramatic speech. No farewell cake. Just a signed PDF. The next quarter, our numbers exceeded projections. The media caught on to the acquisition. They called it unexpected, aggressive, refreshing. I didn't do interviews. I didn't pose for covers. I just kept building. But the calls from my brothers kept coming. Jake wanted to collaborate on something. Ryan suggested family investments. I ignored them all. Not out of spite, but because I had finally realized something vital. I didn't need them. I didn't need any of them. I wasn't the girl they used to overlook. I wasn't the woman who stood in the kitchen hoping someone would ask about her day. I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. And on the rare nights I allowed myself to reflect, I thought about that card. The glitter, the poem, the sketch of my father holding a fishing rod. I never got that moment. That warm hug. That, I'm proud of you. But I got something better. I got freedom. Not just from his opinion, but from the need for it. He called me a loser, but I became his boss. And he'll never forget it. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that silence can be powerful, if you choose it, not if it's forced upon you. I spent most of my life being quiet because I thought it was safer that way. Quieter people get less hurt. If you don't speak, you can't be misunderstood. If you don't try, you can't fail in front of them. And if you don't demand anything, maybe they'll finally give it freely. They didn't. The people I once begged for attention, love, or even a glance from were too full of their own noise to notice mine. And for a long time, that made me believe I was defective. That something in me was fundamentally unworthy of their recognition. I chased the idea that one day, if I accomplished enough, they'd finally turn around and say, "We see you." But here's what they don't tell you about earning validation. When you finally get it, it's never from the people you wanted it from the most. That's why it hurts. But that's also why it frees you. I didn't become powerful when they applauded me. I became powerful when I stopped needing the applause. And that's the lesson I wish someone had whispered to me back when I was a kid standing in the hallway, holding a handmade card. That the approval I craved wasn't a requirement. That I could still rise without it. That I was enough, even when they didn't say it. I learned how to build a life brick by brick without anyone handing me the blueprint. I learned to clap for myself when the room was quiet, to trust my voice even when it shook. And more than anything, I learned that being underestimated is not a weakness. It's an opportunity. They didn't see me coming because they never bothered to look. And in that blindness, I found my advantage. I worked in silence, not because I was small, but because I was preparing. I didn't need the spotlight. I needed a plan. And when it was time, I didn't argue with them. I didn't scream. I handed them paperwork. I handed them consequences. I handed them the truth they never wanted to face. And I did it with grace. Because success isn't just about money, or power, or revenge. Real success is when you look in the mirror and no longer flinch. When you walk into a room and no longer shrink. When you realize your worth isn't tied to who claps the loudest, but to how quietly you endured and still chose to rise. If you're in that place, if you feel invisible, ignored, dismissed, I see you. And I'm telling you right now, you are not weak. You are not small. You are not broken. You are becoming. And when the time comes, they'll ask how you did it. And you'll smile and say, I stopped asking for permission.